This is Kevin Savitz, and this is my interview with Michael Current, who is editor and publisher of the Atari 8-bit Frequently Asked Questions list. This interview was conducted on March 17th, 2014, over Skype. I was at my house in Portland, Oregon. He was at his workplace in La Crosse, Wisconsin. An edited version of this interview will be in episode 10 of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast at ataripodcast.com. This is the full unedited version of the interview. Here we go. Hello.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Wow. So I'm going to be distracted by the technology since I've not done this firsthand before.
We're living in the future. It's like calling Mr. Spacely, you know.
This is pretty interesting. So you're in California somewhere?
Portland, Oregon.
West Coast. Okay.
Yeah. What about you?
I'm in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I came into work where there isn't anybody else right now, so it's quiet here. And you're in a laptop in a dock thing that instead of pulling you off so we're on wireless, I just figured out I could just flip the dock around, and so we're still on hardwire connection. And I got the bigger monitor behind you back there, so I can put stuff there if I want.
Cool.
So
all set up and it's working. All right. Well, I'm recording this, and we'll use it on the podcast. And yeah. So, Ataris. Yay. I have known you online just forever. My first email I have from you is like in 1999, and I'm pretty sure that's just because my archive doesn't go back far enough.
Yeah, I was thinking. I think that your Antic magazine archive was based in part on a bunch of my copies of Antic. Is that true?
That's true.
I still got them.
I have the occasional cataloging thing around here that has your name written on pencil in the cover, that you like things you gave to me and stuff. So yeah. Okay, so mostly I want to talk about your frequently asked questions list, your Atari 8-bit computers FAQ, which I think you started in 1992. Is that right?
That's what I say there. Okay, now why did you have a second window over here? I guess that's not important. Yeah, so at some point I went back and tried to figure that out, and it appears to be 92. So at that point I was well, I don't know what time of the year it was, but it was either my sophomore or junior year in college at Carleton College. So that's where I was at that time.
What inspired you to start it?
Yeah, I figured that was the next logical question. So, and at the beginning, it was about the fact that there was this online discussion group that was kind of broken up into three pieces, but no one seemed to understand those three pieces. So there was the CompSys Atari 8-bit Usenet news group. There was the Info Atari 8 Digest, which was an internet email regular compilation of postings to the news group, which was supposed to be equivalent, but it wasn't necessarily, depending on whether things were working or not. And then there's a third layer, which was the Info A8 BitNet listserv, which was supposed to be doing the same thing again, making a compilation of all the postings in the other places available to people on BitNet, which was separate from the internet at that time.
Right.
And then vice versa, if those people were subscribed to it, postings were supposed to be turned into postings that appeared elsewhere. But the gateways were always not working right, and so people kept talking to each other and not seeing the same messages, and everyone was all confused. And so I think the original inspiration was to try to put out information that helped pull all that together so everyone knew what was going on and how it all was supposed to work together when it was working. And then there was sort of beyond that, there were other things on the internet at the time. There was no web yet, but there was like FTP sites, and there was the University of Michigan Atari Archive was the main place for software and text files out there. And so I had information about that from the very beginning, and then also how to get files delivered from there using an email gateway service they had called BART. I can't remember what that stood for, but um, that was part of it too. So the beginning was just sort of about trying to pull together how to get at and use Atari related stuff on the internet at that stage. And it was very short compared to now.
I just yeah, I brought it up in my browser and I was just like, okay, if I printed this, how long would it be? And it says 192 pages with a tiny 10-point font.
Right. So it's gotten huge. At some early stage, the recommendations was that an FAQ list for Usenet was supposed to be no bigger than 100K, and it's been up in the upper hundreds K for some time. I don't know what it's at now, but it's probably 600, 700, 800, something like that. So those old restrictions are pretty much long gone. So it's more a matter of what's manageable. Although, on the other hand, fairly recently, when the service I used to post it has not worked, sometimes the issue has been that my FAQ list has been too big for that. And so the last time they fixed it, they bumped up their upper limit to accommodate me for the reasonable future.
So it's actually still posted to Usenet then.
Yeah, that's the way to post it. And so and it's a good time to think about that because the mechanisms are broken now for the first time kind of ever. And so I'm kind of wondering whether I'm going to track down people who are going to fix it again or whether I got to figure out different ways to go. And so, this whole Usenet FAQ list system is an ancient process that where you had to get well, you actually know this because you were moderating the Consistori Announce news group.
Right. I had several FAQ lists, and I am still, I think, technically moderator of CompSys Atari Announce. But
Yeah.
back the site I was using to post, they stopped supporting Usenet, and so I moved to another service, and then they stopped supporting Usenet, and eventually I was just like tired of give up, and I feel kind of bad about it because there's still people out there, and some people, there's still like 3 users left still using Usenet, and I took on this job that I'm no longer doing, but it just became technically not feasible.
Yeah, and there are still Usenet services out there. I can't remember I had Okta News. That seemed to kind of just disappear recently, but I can still post. I think I have access to some free Usenet server service. But for years and years, I've not posted directly to Usenet. I've used an email service at MIT where the FAQ the sort of mother source archive is located. So I refer to it as the FAQ server, FAQ server.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a little email service. It has a help file that you get back if you email it help. And then and it's kind of like dealing with the listserv, but you can send it commands and tell it to do things. And so basically you have a version of the FAQ there, and then it automatically knows how often you want it to post to Usenet, and so it just does that automatically at the interval that you tell it to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the process is I keep my own local copy of the FAQ, and I update that all the time, and then when I think of it, I will take the extra step of sending a fresh copy to the FAQ server at MIT, which then will automatically send post that copy to the Usenet news group when it's next scheduled to do so. So I've almost never posted them directly to Usenet myself. But on the other hand, for the last 3 months now, that thing has not been online. It's not responding to emails, and plus the original mother FTP site for Usenet FAQs is down these days. And
The one at MIT?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this has just been the last couple of months, and so it's about time that I try to figure out if anyone is out there who's going to bring it back, or whether that piece of the infrastructure is gone for good, in which case I'm pretty sure I could just keep posting it directly to Usenet, and then the several other FAQ archives around the world would still pick it up from there and archive it that way. So it wouldn't necessarily mean abandoning Usenet altogether, but it's possible that the source archive at MIT might be done at this stage. There's always, it's going to happen someday. Maybe that's now. I'm not quite sure right now. But there's a separately existing email list for whoever is actually still posting FAQs to Usenet, which has been live not long ago. So I just have to post on there and see if anyone's paying attention and go from there. So that's kind of this current situation. We're sort of behind schedule at this point because I have the usual amount of bits of upgrades or bits of changes I made to the FAQ list, but it hasn't gone out for a while. So,
well, that was going to be my next question about the current types of upgrades you have. I mean, I have the list here from November of you detail every little change you make. Can you just talk generally about how the FAQ is changing in modern times?
Well, I have thought about this. Might be two different ways to answer. One might be the transition from a guide to internet services to, I feel like it turned into kind of like an encyclopedia of the 8-bit Atari for the modern, reasonably tech-savvy person is how I think of it now. Mm-hmm. So at one point, I did a huge restructuring and organizing around all the aspects of the Atari which correspond to a modern machine, like how do you input, how do you display, how do you use sound, how do you do mass storage, and so on, how you do printing, telecommunications. So that was a mammoth undertaking to just restructure it that way. And ever since then, I have gone back kind of over and over again, revisiting things and besides researching even more details from the time period, also relating things to modern day. For instance, I had a section about attaching, and I have a copy back here too, attaching like ISA cards. And now it's been so many years, no one knows what that is anymore either. So, so things keep moving ahead. And so I used to talk about USB, and maybe that's going to die soon. So who knows? Right. So that's kind of one way I think about it, is that I'm trying to make sure that someone who's kind of generally tech savvy today can, if you find this thing and if you were to read it straight through or read sections of it, it would help you understand that technology from back in the late 70s and early to mid 80s in the context of how things work now. Because I always, probably a lot of Atari people feel the same way, that technology in a lot of ways doesn't even advance very much. Everything is just a little bit of a tweak from the past technology. We still have keyboards. We had keyboards in the 1970s, and they're arranged exactly the same way, designed to keep a manual typewriter from not having its keys stick when they go up and hit the page, right? So yeah, so that's kind of some of the big picture of what I'm trying to do with it. Another big picture thing, which maybe will make us transition into the day-to-day type of updating, is I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? I don't know. So, I mean, day to day, I watch various news sources, news sites, Atari Age. I don't post there much, but I watch everything that gets posted there, and I'm just constantly. Or I collect magazines. I have a even more comprehensive magazine collection than I did back then, and so. Everything I read, collect, watch, read, I'm thinking in terms of, have I seen this before? Is this something that is covered in my FAQ? Is this more details I haven't seen before? So it's a constant visiting and revisiting and revisiting. My previous thought I was going to talk about was the fact that traditionally the original FAQ list concept was that you're collecting postings that other people make into a FAQ list directly. And so over time, probably originally the FAQ list was all written by me, and then I collected lots and lots of things from other people around the world, incorporated them into the FAQ list, generally not doing much editing to them. And then over more modern years, I've been going back and kind of retaking over various sections and doing research more thoroughly than and understanding what even those people didn't know as much at the time, and just upgrading and upgrading and upgrading. So at this point, it's a lot more. In a way, it's a lot more like it was in the beginning, which is that it's a lot more things that I have created myself, and so I'm taking direct responsibility for it instead of just saying this person posted this in 2003 or something like that.
Right.
So that's been a big transition over time too, and of course I'm learning everything all along the way. And in recent years, I did make a list. I've sort of done some intensive investigations of a few specific topics that I felt were just not covered out there anywhere in the past. And so some things I'm proud of that are in the FAQ list now are the power supply section, which has been there for a long time, but at this point, I have collected the precise specs as taken directly off every North American power supply Atari branded that there ever was, and I've done the same thing to the extent that I've found them so far with European power supplies. A lot of that was scraping pictures from wherever I could find them, but eventually I still wasn't getting everything, and so I now have a physical collection of all these power supplies for devices I don't even have, because I wanted to answer the question once and for all, and to make sure no one else can question the future. In this case, I've actually built a whole little semi-separate archive of pictures of all the power supplies, especially in a way that you can read the specs off of them. And I have links into those pictures from the FAQ list, which are on my own website. So, and even now I have a few more European ones that have turned up recently, so I need to add to that some more. But that's been kind of one of the recent areas that I've put a lot more specific focus on. Another one is modem handlers, which, I mean, we've all heard of a few, like Bob Turn came out with a bunch. That was one of the later telecom programs, but in the early years, there were tons of them, and I wasn't around really at that point. I never had a modem until pretty later on. So trying to sort out all the modem handlers that there were, R handlers and T handlers, and all the many, many versions, and the R-bin handler, there were many versions. And that was like sort of like archaeological digging, because you can find copies of all these things online, but they were all variations of each other. And so I kept looking. I was actually viewing the binary files just on my PC with text editors and comparing sort of unreadable characters to figure out how they related to each other. You can kind of see over time how people would leave messages that would still be there in future versions, even though that wasn't on the surface the same version anymore. And so that was intense and kind of fun. And and again, kind of like the power supplies, I ended up with, I now have like probably the most complete collection of modem handlers anyone has ever pulled together. I've actually not gotten around to sort of doing something with that, but I've got them all in one folder on my PC that I would probably ought to share with the world at some point, because people ask about that from time to time. But I'm sure they've never all been in one place before. And in fact, I know a couple of them I ended up finding on our Space St. Paul Atari Computer Enthusiasts Discs of the Month from years and years ago, and they weren't on the web anywhere that I could find at all. So that's part of the collection.
What I've started doing with things like that is put them up on archive.org, and then it's just there forever, because they're going to store that stuff forever and ever. And then that way it's just easy, single shop. It's not on some random website that might go down one day. I just feel like they probably have a little more permanence than than putting up on your personal homepage or something.
Certainly, unless they grab it when you put on your homepage or something. Yeah, I'm not fully up to speed on what all happens with archive.org, so that's an interesting thought or suggestion.
Anyway, yeah, I would highly encourage you to upload that folder somewhere at least. And
Yeah.
that's pretty awesome. Do you have any other examples of things that power supplies, modem handlers?
Yeah, I got two more examples like that because I was thinking about these things. One is, and again, these are all things that are not quite done exactly because things were never done, actually. Memory upgrades. Um, I sort of decided at some point not too long ago that it was still unclear to me how to explain the variations and which ones are compatible with each other. And you do some initial investigations and you find too many inconsistencies among other people's postings and so on. And so, I guess somehow when you're doing that, you sort of realize that there's something to do here. I need to collect all this information together, and I can make a contribution by pulling it all together and making sense of it for myself, and then presenting it in a way that's going to make sense for other readers as well. So, that's kind of the ongoing inspiration factor is that you find things that aren't clear that people haven't collectively come together to understand yet, and so it seems like during the research and then doing the writing and presenting can be a way to just contribute to the world. And so I've got a very compact but very dense section now on all the various memory upgrades that I have found to have ever existed for all the 8-bit computers. And so that's another recent section where kind of once you know the basic parameters, then you can go there at this point and figure out what's what and what's related to what. Pending a few additional things which I need to add to it again. And then I can see these are not in the logical order, but as I was doing those modem handlers, it kind of became necessary to go on from those to also deal with the various free telecom programs that were around.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Term is a later one, but there were a bunch of popular ones before that, like Express, and I have to look at my FAQ list to remind myself. But there was a whole world of early ones of those things that I had never really been aware of. And so, but a lot of times they were tightly integrated with the modem handlers, and so that's why you couldn't really deal with one without dealing with the other issue as well.
Right.
And so for the moment, a section that had been there for a long time with sort of basic telecom programs, for a long time it had just been kind of current ones, like current as of the late 90s. So we had Kermit 65 and Ice-T and Flickerterm and those there, but now it's trying to include all of the important free ones from the whole history of the platform. And then I kind of still have to make up my mind whether I want to go back and try to do that for commercial ones too.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like those were just never as popular for some reason for the most part. Just maybe, Home Pack was big, but not many others were actually used so widely. So,
This might be kind of a tangent, but have you done, or are you aware of anyone who has done that kind of research collection of DOSes for the Atari?
Besides me?
Yeah, well, have you done it? I guess so. Because I'm particularly interested in the pirate DOSes, and I want to know where they came from and why there's so many different flavors, and that interests me. But
so everything that I do, it's always like you got to find some boundaries and parameters, or otherwise it just goes on forever. And
Sure.
So, in the case of DOS, it's true that. So what I've chosen to try to be very complete and detailed about the official Atari DOSes, and so even there, I've got this thing where there's a talk about what is it, the German one. What is that called? 7.3.1. There's the section. DOS XLE.
mm-hmm.
And there's very little information out there about it. I have never seen anything official about it. I've just seen the program, and so I don't know how to treat that. I've just got Andreas's writing about it. But anyway, so for DOSes, I'm covering the Atari official DOSes in detail, and then I'm kind of covering what I sort of am judging to be current ones that are maintained more or less today. MyDOS and SparDOS, and what's that other one? XDOS. Um, yeah, I'm reminding myself that I'm covering lots of other ones now too. So what is my parameter here? Major ones, major commercial DOSes. What does my section say? This section attempts to list all released third-party full-feature DOS versions beyond RealDOS, SparDOS X, and XDOS. And then I'm trying to do it in chronological order when they first came out. But still, that is setting me short of the bar that you're pointing out, which is that there's myriad of other little homegrown pirate versions and variations and things. Because basically anyone could have done that at any point, and there's probably almost endless supply of those things. And so, I just personally choose to not go down that route and figure stuff out. And this is kind of like an example of why I think it's rewarding to try to have my own document, a resource that I get to build over time in my spare time, as opposed to, say, contributing to Wikipedia, which I have tried once or twice, but then I fix something and someone else unfixes it, and it's like, I don't want to do that battle. What's the point? If it's wrong forever, then that's thing's problem, and maybe over time people will figure out that there are other places to find more accurate sources of information. So I get to use that example when I teach library research to college students all the time these days, so it's kind of fun still.
I have a question. I feel a little, as a guy who hosts a podcast about Atari, I feel a little disingenuous asking this question, but I'm going to do it anyway. So why do you still keep it updated?
It's a good question. So, some of it is it's still building. Ever since I sort of transitioned into encyclopedia, I've never caught up. There are still things to do. I've got a to-do list at the top. Mm-hmm. It still seems like I can, like we were talking about before, it still seems like I'm finding ways to contribute sort of compiled expertise or knowledge or something about various aspects of the platform that despite all the sources of information that are out there, despite all the forums where people discuss things with each other, people haven't figured out yet. And so it seems like it fits some of these things sort of fits my interests and my skill sets. And, professionally, I probably ought to be publishing formally in journals or writing a book or something. And so instead of that, I have this weird FAQ list thing that I'm writing forever with no end in sight. And sometimes it seems like, is that scholarly? And then some other times it seems like, well, this is just like any other faculty member who's endlessly writing a book and never actually decides to finish it and publish it. And so maybe it's in that category as well. So I don't know what the answer is exactly. I can't stop. It's going to go on. I mean, I've been involved with Atari stuff in a whole bunch of different ways over time, and I do feel like some things I'm more attached to than others. Some things I hope and I can see are going to eventually die down and I'll let go of. But the two things that mean the most to me still are the FAQ list and my Atari History Timelines website, and we can still keep this on track because there is a very deliberate overlap between that history website and the last section in the FAQ list, which I had to at one point thoroughly resynchronize. And every time I do 8-bit history updates, I always do it in both places going forward. So,
all right, so let's talk a little bit about your timeline. Tell me about it.
The Atari History Timeline was probably first started, that website. I probably started that. Well, I know I started it in about 2008, and originally it had to do with sorting out for my mind and for the rest of the world's mind, sort of the basic genealogy of the various forms of Atari over the years, like when it split up in '84 and turned into the arcade version and the Tumelo version, Atari Games and Atari Corp. And then Atari Tel went to Mitsubishi, but Warner kept Atari Games until '85 before signing to Namco. All those details people really had not figured out yet, and so you don't get credit. People don't recognize it, but it's kind of fun to see that what is now understood as facts from time to time, I recognize as coming from things that I did or I figured out, and you even see bits of your own writing in everybody else's books and articles and things, and usually they don't know where they got it from, but if nothing else, I get to have the fun satisfaction of recognizing other people having found what I do to be useful in that way, and that's been true with the FAQ list forever too. I mean, I recognize when people quote it, whether or not they credit where they got it from. So it's one way you can kind of self-measure your impact is by seeing your work show up in other people's stuff. Anyway, so the history thing kind of started with that. I mean, my interest kind of went way back. I know I wrote a history of Atari paper in junior high, based
Wow.
largely on the Scott Cohen Zap, The Rise and Fall of Atari book, which has since become notorious for being full of bad information, and yet it's still handy because the first person quotes he does have in there are still important pieces of the puzzle that I fit in with other information that comes out in modern days, so I keep that book around. So for some reason, I've always found that fascinating too, and so, at first it was probably a lot of trying to track down where all the various pieces went to. There were at least two different rounds of Atari-owned arcade operations that all eventually in the end got owned and purchased by Namco at various different times. Atari Operations, Atari Adventure. Namco eventually owned them all in the end. And then there's Atari Japan, sort of turned into Namco before that. And then Chuck E. Cheese is the big one. You can always point at the Chuck E. Cheese out by the mall. That actually is a thing that connected back to Atari originally. So people are sort of stunned to hear that, even today. So sort of trying to find a way to present all that with some sort of basic facts, figures and dates was kind of one early inspiration, but it's just kept going and going. I know I found kind of early on a legal document, SEC filing that lists every Atari arcade release to the month that had ever happened, and that was compiled as part of the sale of Atari games from Time Warner to Midway. Whenever that was. So that was kind of one of the initial starting points for the timeline, was getting all the arcade titles and release dates in there. But I keep sort of deciding on more things that I want to have in their entirety. Like I want to have everything that has ever been released with the Atari brand on it. That was kind of the old original Atari anyway. Every thing that was announced, but I don't want vaporware things that weren't announced. That's setting my boundary somewhere. Mm-hmm. I'd like to have every president or vice president or anything like that in there. I feel like in terms of personnel and personalities, everyone these days is mostly interested in the engineers, the inventors, the programmers, and that makes perfect sense to me too. But in order for a company to work, you need marketing people and sales people and leaders and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of those names have been much slower to come by, and I feel like I've been filling in a lot of the details there that other people haven't been doing. And just recently I found another source, gold mine. I discovered that one of our databases here in our library has the whole Marquee Who's Who database in one place. And so, of course, I search Atari like I do with every new database I encounter. And many of those entries I've used in the past, but many I have not. And so I scrolled through it once the other day, and I found yet another VP of marketing for Atari Computers who's there for several years, and somehow I never even encountered his name before. Someone named Wirt, I think it was, W-I-R-T. And so every time I get a new bit of information, I got to figure out how does that fit into everything else that I thought I knew. What did I have right? Was I guessing about? And there's always a way to put it all together. So to me, it's sort of like it's genealogy, but with a company instead of with your family. So you're always finding new pieces and always putting the puzzle pieces together. And so I find that fun. And like back to the 8-bit perspective, this is a VP of marketing for the computers, and so that name is going to go on the FAQ list as well. We can just keep rambling, I guess. It's it's hard to figure out why these things are interesting, but they seem very interesting to me. And so it's like when I get going, I just can't stop. I mean, work sort of makes me stop, but in between work, it's like once you get going on something, it's like you forget to eat, you forget to go to bed because you keep thinking more of ways. Oh, that's what that could mean. Now I got to investigate that now. So.
Right, so you have the FAQ, you have the timeline, and then you have the vendors and developers document.
Yeah, I still do that too. And
is that sort of? It seems I looked at it. It seems like that might be kind of a dying thing. I mean, there's not a lot of Atari vendors anymore, at least.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. There's not that many vendors. But there are lots of people who are producing things, writing new programs, and I guess essentially if they have a website somewhere, then I'm still wanting to list it and add it. And if there's a new version that someone puts out, then I'll update it with that information as well. So yeah, I mean, for years and years I wondered if the title wasn't very good, but and compared to FAQ, it'd be much easier for me to let it go. But so far, I mean, that one, I haven't put a ton of effort into it for a long time. I mean, the plan used to be to every so often, I mean, when it was mostly paper things, I actually wrote letters, confirmation letters to everyone, like a large swath of everyone in the list. And I got back a lot of replies. And if I had no contact information besides a US mail address, then I would drop people at that point. And by now, pretty much everybody is online, so that wouldn't make sense anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, that's still going too. And people keep writing things, releasing new versions of things, so I've still got that going. We've still got Atari Club. I'm looking at my main website where I list all the things that I do or have done.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I looked at that. I wanted to talk to you about the St. Paul Atari Computer Enthusiasts.
Space. I was just there at a space meeting Friday night. We still exist, a user group, old-fashioned user group.
So are you the president?
I am the president.
Since 1998?
Yeah. And even though I moved away like 11 years ago, I still show up 3 or 4 times a year or something like that, and they keep letting me president. So, and there's only a handful of us. There's like 10, people. We have like 6 or 7 or 8 people show up at a crack. We have around 10 members, but it's been stable for so many years. So, and that's my way really to see software running on the Atari, new stuff mostly, because another one of my ongoing forever habits is, well, 2 things. I collect every month. I write a little column for the newsletter for the club, and then as related to that, I also have a few sources for Atari news that I scour for contributing any formal or not formal, but just any announcements of new programs out there to our newsletter. And then any software that comes out for the 8-bit, I will send off to our Disc of the Month librarian, who then pulls them together and puts out discs of the month, which we all buy for $3 a piece at our meetings. And so when new things come out that are not commercial, which is pretty much everything, I always send them off to Glenn, who keeps a stock of those and puts them out on discs every month. And then the few months that I show up, I buy 3 or 4 or 5 discs of the month at a crack. And so now I just did that the other day, and now I've got 4 discs I have to go through of some of the recent programs that have come out for the Atari. So that's kind of that's the thing that actually keeps me actually using my Atari, because I sort of used Glenn's Disc of the Month to keep me doing that.
Interesting. So what Atari machine do you use?
In my just recently revamped AV setup, I have a 130XE, and I have a Indus attached to it, mostly based on its looks, because it looks nice there. And I actually have more interestingly maybe, an S-Drive NUX, which is my route. If I want to, I can get software directly between the Atari and my laptop by way of an SD card. Because for years, my old PC had a 5.25-inch floppy, which was capable of the low double density reading and writing of Atari floppy disks with those various old utilities. And so I had a route for getting stuff back and forth for many years that way. But I finally abandoned that PC, but I did that thinking about another way to do that. And so the SD card is my way to do that these days, because my laptop has a card reader, and I've got this S-Drive NUX.
So I use is that like an SIO to SD? Is it that same sort of thing? Or?
It's in that sort of general category of modern devices.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just one of the other ones.
I see.
And again, I sort of my FAQ list to figure that out again. So I think you want stuff in at once. But yeah, this one, I mean, you can boot off it. So it actually functions like a disk drive, right? Just that the media is these little tiny SD cards. So it's a little quirky to deal with, but it gets the job done. And so if I want to, I can copy things back and forth that way, or I can, like finding modem drivers on ancient space floppies, I can use a 2-drive setup to copy that to a flop, or copy that from a floppy to the SD card, take it over the PC. Here's my way to copy it there and add it to the collection. So that is my current setup. See, I just did this too, and I wrote it in our latest newsletter, which I need to post. But I just got a giant modern TV and relatively fancy AVR. So now my Atari is connected by way of its S-video output to my receiver, which turns that out into this giant LED TV, which gives me the largest and most beautiful display that I've ever seen the Atari put out, and it's just amazing. I've never had a monitor that took the separate Chroma and Luma signals before, and so now I'm doing that onto this gigantic television, and I learned how to tell both my AVR and my TV to delay as minimal as possible. And so, I'm going to be very fussy because I do have a gaming background in me. So, but it's good enough for me. I think I can tell a difference, but it's so close that it works. And so, I sat down and scored 100,000 plus on Missile Command just because I can, and it's fun to do, and roll over the colors. And I dug out something else I already had, which was like a 25-foot joystick extender cable, so I can do this from across the room. Mm-hmm. It's pretty neat.
Awesome. Really cool. So the space newsletter, is that something that's available to everybody, or just to members of the group, or
it's
what?
out there for everybody. So the website has the newsletters. Here's another project I took forever and ever to do, but I finished that last year. So all the past newsletters of our club, back to every issue that I could find. Mm-hmm. I see that my website should be upgraded with the year, shouldn't it? That's something I should fix. Is up there. And so the only thing is I might not get the current one up there immediately, but in the first couple of years are not complete just because we can't find them, but everything from about 83 or 84 to the present is up there, just ready for the world to read. And they're mostly not very in depth or anything, but as I was scanning all these things, one reason it took so long is because I kept finding new material for my FAQ list or for my Atari history website. And so, especially when it's writings that it doesn't exist anywhere else, then it's definitely worth it to read it carefully and figure out where it fits in. An example of that is somebody from space was at the January 85 CES when the STs were first displayed, and along with the 8-bits, the XEs were first displayed, like the 65 XEM and 65 XEP and
Wow.
all sorts of other things that no one ever saw again. And so somebody from space was there and saw it and wrote in our newsletter what they saw. And so here's a whole article about these rare things that it's very hard to get accurate information about.
First person account.
Yeah, suddenly
Yeah.
had a new source that no one else had seen really in many, many years. So that helped me a lot. And so I, just take advantage of that and contribute to my FAQ and the history site too. So that's like a little example of how, to me, getting those old newsletters up online and actually reading them carefully along the way was just sort of another way to contribute to the general, whatever it is that we have, general world of Atari knowledge or community or whatever it is.
I'll check through my stuff and see. I'm pretty sure I have some space newsletters in a cardboard box. I don't know if I have the right years that you don't have yet, but
If you've got the earliest years, that would be really, really exciting.
I will check.
82, 83.
Okay.
Wow.
I'll see what I've got. It's just piles of magazines behind me, and I'll have to go look. Yeah, you need to get those up on archive.org also, in my opinion. They've got a nice collection of computer newsletters, and just make it more available to the world. More people are likely to find it there.
And there's digital.
I was gonna just do it myself, but I couldn't find a way just to download them all from your site easily. So at once, What'd you say? There's digital. What?
Digital Press is another site that I have worked with in the past, sent them things, and they scan a bunch of stuff online. But now, there's some kind of falling out among people there, so I don't really understand what's going on with that site either. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I've been spending so many years trying to get stuff up that I haven't thought about what happens after that. In terms of making sure it stays up even after I disappear, my website goes away. But I bought my domain name, planning on having my website exist and my email exist as long as I exist. So, and I plan on that being for a while yet. So, it'll be safe.
Good. All right. I thought we could reminisce for a minute about the Cleveland Freenet Atari Special Interest Group.
Oh yeah. Were you around in those days too?
Yeah. Yeah, we knew each other then, and in fact, yeah, I mean, when it was going, I don't remember when I started on Cleveland Freenet, maybe 1989, 1990, and I only used it for the Atari SIG, pretty much, which was a great community. And then
I really forgot you were there.
and it's okay. And then in December 1999, Cleveland Freenet went away, and I believe that at the time they said it was because of financial issues and also Y2K. They didn't think the software could handle it.
Y2K was a big thing that sort of forced the issue. They decided they weren't going to solve it. So.
And then you and I backed up the entire thing.
That was you too. I forgot that. That's right.
And now it's all up on Atari Archive. But I mean, that was just an amazing community. And it's just like, it's like Usenet, like Cleveland Freenet, just another one of those spaces that we used to have that don't have anymore.
And that was just like an online community before there was a web to have a community on, and yet it was, it started out being a dial-up thing, and so it was local community, and then when they made it accessible by Telnet, and then the rest of us who were online at that stage could tell it in too. And why I originally got into there, that's kind of, what else was there? That kind of was it for a while there. That was kind of the internet online place that you could go to, it seems like. And somehow the Atari SIG there just became large and relatively important for a while there. And I never was in charge. It was Len Stiss. Remember, he was the main person. It was only like a year after I was doing it. It's like, you're posting more than anybody else. Do you want to help us run it? And I was like, sure. So I started out being AJ848, and I turned into AA700, as I recall. And then along with that, access to the XX004 administrative account for the SIG. See all these things that don't fall out of your brain for some reason? And yeah, that was fun. So I never, again, like we were saying before, I never had a modem really. So I missed out the whole BBSing world and community and stuff. But that was kind of what I did do along those lines, just sort of internet based instead of modem based. And it was fun. I mean, I was again at college at the time. I could actually dial into the campus VAX and then telnet from there to the Cleveland Freenet Atari SIG. And so I could, being in my dorm room and typing things and seeing things that were in Cleveland was kind of a way to amaze your neighbors on the floor, because that was just not really common at that point.
Yeah.
So, and then if you want to keep on this line of thinking, in terms of things that I did, another big thing way back then was to collect all the issues of Z Magazine that I could find and pull them into one place and put them on our Atari SIG at the Cleveland Freenet, because no one had ever done that before or seen them all in one place before that I knew about. Maybe BBS has had it, but the internet had never seen them all in one place before.
For listeners who don't know what that is, can you explain what Z Magazine was?
Z Mag was, how do you explain what that was? That was mostly a weekly online sort of news and features magazine that was focused on the 8-bit Atari. And most of its years, that guy Ron Kovacs was running it. I guess at the very beginning, he wasn't at the very beginning, but he was nearly at the beginning. And kind of as a side thought, at the very, very end, I was actually contributing editor to it, which I just had a column where I was sort of perusing the internet. It was just a collection of interesting postings from the news group or internet email list from the past week or month, and collecting them and posting them. But after then, ZMag ended, and then we had been posting them to the Cleveland Freenet Atari SIG, and so somehow I decided that I wanted us to have a complete collection, and that turned into a gigantic project. And so part of it was identifying them and collecting them, and part of it was actually getting them all in the same format, because I recall a lot of times you'd find them, they were sort of in the original ATASCII format, so the line feeds, carriage returns, or line widths were different, and some would be in DOS format, some would be in Unix line format, and so I collected them all together and made them all the same basic text format, so they were readable all the same way. And then, just a little trivia, there seems to have never been an issue number 208. There's just a collected bunch of material, and so just because I was collecting the rest of the issues, I decided to bunch all this material together and sort of call this a surrogate for issue 208. And so the sort of fun thing is, everywhere on the internet now where you find a ZMag archive collection, you will find it includes the issue 208, which is not an original. It's the one that I put together when I try to build a collection of ZMag issues. So you can always tell that where they got most of their issues, if not the entire archive, was from what I had done for the Cleveland Freenet. So just trivia, I don't know.
Awesome. So I meant to ask, you said you have your Atari hooked up. How do you use it, your Atari 130XE now? Mostly for games?
These days, mostly, well, yeah, games, and I guess mostly specifically checking out whatever we have on the discs of the month, mm-hmm. which is going to be most of the current things that come out, demos or sound demos or graphics. And it's all the European show releases. ABIC has an annual contest, and there's Forever, and there is oh, I can't think of them all very quickly. Forever's on my mind because a few hours ago I had found the Forever 2014 Atari stuff had been posted out there, and so just automatically I download that and zip it up and send it off to Glenn, and so and then in a few months down the road, he'll put that stuff on a disc of the month, and then I will buy a disc of the month, and then at that point, I'll finally stick it in my Atari and see what it all is. So,
You could put it on an SD card and just walk it over there.
I could do that, and that would work. But I somehow find it more convenient and also more something satisfying or something to just get it onto an actual disc and do it that way.
I don't know. I know ABAC, and so not familiar with the Forever thing. What am I? What are we
It's
talking about?
from I only know this because I was reading it this morning. It's a multi-platform party that's in Slovakia every year, and it is one of the major Atari ones. So, so some of the most advanced programmers that Europest offers, since that's where most of them are, contribute to these things. That's a culture that we'll never get to experience here, I guess. But it seems like Europeans like traveling for a weekend and just programming together for 3 days straight, and then releasing the results. So, and then we get to see what they did. And I do buy things on occasion. I mean, where there have been commercial releases, I bought what was that? Zoop or no? I don't remember. There, a few.
That Zoom game?
Yeah, or the Tempest game. I bought that. So occasionally I'll actually buy things. Having our Space Club, one of our members and regular visitors is Lance Ringquist and he's Video 61.
Yeah.
And so he sells all these things, and I can, if we just arrange it, I can buy things from him without dealing with shipping by just buying it at the meeting. So that's a handy way to get stuff on occasion.
Are the space discs of the month available to regular people who through the mail, or
We have not been doing that. That's sort of supposed to be a perk of being a member.
Yeah, just curious.
So, and it's like, I don't know. That's just the way it's always been, I guess. At one point, we put together a CD-ROM of the collection, or at least we were going to. I think that kind of died off again at some point. But yeah. But we're pretty much a local club, such it is. So we aren't really set up for having a worldwide membership list or whatever.
Sure. All right. So where do you teach?
I am a librarian at University of Wisconsin La Crosse, and we librarians at this campus are faculty, and so that's why I would use some of those terms too.
Okay.
So one of my official titles is assistant professor, and my working title is reference librarian. So I'm in charge of reference services. So we have a traditional reference desk, and people can call or email or chat with us online or whatever. So we'll help people find information resources in the academic setting, college students basically. And so you can see how maybe that can relate to how my private life is also research, because I seem to enjoy that kind of thing.
Do you keep at least one book about Atari somewhere in the reference library?
I actually have us buy books from time to time that are in my field of interest. I don't do that too much, but some of I don't remember if I had us buy the Vendel Goldberg book, but I have had us buy some of the other ones that have come out in the recent past. So, and I know we own Zap here, because that's one of my standard test searches to see how that turns up or whatever. So, yeah, librarians always get to do that. Every library is a little quirky in its holdings, and besides my normal subject areas of responsibility, I will buy the occasional video game history book and that kind of thing. So
Our library here in Multnomah County has a copy of the book, the Atari book on fixing, repairing arcade games, and it's just like, and it's like it says like loose leaf, library use only, and it's like, but it's awesome. You know, they've got it, and somebody bought that, and it just
I've
makes
got
me
that
happy.
PDF. I've never seen the actual book before, so that's pretty cool.
All right, I always ask this question, and it might not make sense in your case because you have a platform, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you could tell something to the Atari 8-bit community that exists today, what would you tell them?
You're right. That's a tough question. I'd probably say something like keep using your Atari and don't forget the people and how Atari, the technology, have contributed to what we have today. Don't let the memory die. How about that? That sounds kind of cool.
Awesome. All right, I think that's about it. Unless there's something I should have asked that you want to tell me.
Oh, I'll think of more later, but I don't think I'll think of anything else right now.
All right. Well, you know where to find me.
I do. My one and only Skype contact so far.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is fun.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.